Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. This is your host, Julia, and today I want to talk about money. We cover all of the deeply personal topics on this podcast as they relate to family building. We talk about the emotions, we talk about the physical experiences, we talk about the interpersonal relationships, we talk about the hard, gritty, uncomfortable, happy, joyful, messy stuff as it relates to family. And yet we never talk about money. And believe it or not, planning for a family, planning for a fertility journey, experiencing a fertility journey, and sort of navigating our family lives requires some financial planning. And that is so uncomfortable. There's no topic more uncomfortable than money, even all the ones that we've previously discussed. That's where this episode comes in. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Emily Green, who is a financial planner at Ivf, an organization that is designed to help women take control over their financial destiny. This is a really important episode. We talk about how do you plan for your family? How do you think about your financial future, your family's financial future? And then we also talk about, to some extent, there's mystery that for those of us who define family as having kids, we think about the moment of building a family as kind of like a Disney movie. Now, remember, Disney movies have that heterosexual couple that fall in love, they kiss, there's fireworks, there's a great crescendo in the music, and that's the end of the movie. That's the culmination of all these things. And yet, even though we sometimes think about getting to baby, if that's our goal, or getting to whatever our goal is with our family as being the end, it's really only the beginning. And so Emily and I talk about how you build the trade-offs between your career and your family planning and your family life. And we talk about maternity leave, and we talk about re-entry into the work, and we talk about balancing it all as a working parent. I love this episode. I really related to Emily's experiences in her planning for maternity leave and her experiences balancing work and life and family. If you like it as much as I do, please don't forget to share it with a friend. You never know who could benefit from it. Please also give us a great review wherever you listen to podcasts. Sign up for the Stork'd newsletter. I think it's pretty great. And don't forget to follow on social media. Thank you. And here is Emily. I am so excited to welcome Emily to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways people build and define their family lives. Emily has a great story to share with us and a good perspective in thinking about how to consider family planning as a whole and really navigate the ins and outs of planning for creating your family and then stepping back into the workforce. So welcome, Emily. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. I think we're just going to get right into it. And I've gotten to know you recently over the past several months, and you're so thought-provoking. You've got such a big, broad perspective. But for those of our audience members who are meeting you for the first time, can you give us a little introduction? Who are you?
Sure, of course. So Emily Green, I run private wealth at a company called Ivf. We are an investment firm focused with the mission to get more money into the hands of women. So I have the unique position of talking to women all day long. Sometimes I think I forget that the world is even half men. I speak to so many women, and I had a baby last year. I live in New York City, and my background, I worked in traditional finance forever within my career. And so I've seen how big corporations have treated women kind of going through having kids, trying to have kids after they have kids, all of that, as well as I change into Ivf as a women's focused company. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're leading with my background in big corporate finance. And finance historically is just not one of those places that is welcoming to families. We love women that put their career first, in that we, and I'm saying we because I'm also in finance, we love women that will hustle, that will work long hours, that will show up after those long hours at the cocktail party for networking and just be ever present in the workplace. And that is incongruent with raising a family, especially a young family. Tell me a little bit about what you saw in finance and how that shaped your perspective around your own family building.
Yeah, it was interesting. I worked at a big bank, and when I was an associate, which you're kind of like mid-level, I was the only woman on the team. And so I was like 25, 26 years old. I was also much younger than the men that were at my same level. A lot of them were in their 30s. And the thing that always amazed me was exactly what you're talking about. That I was almost shamed for not going out to get drinks with them because I didn't want to. I wanted to go to the gym. I wanted to go home. I wanted to spend time with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, all these types of things. And they would just tease me, shame me, to the fact of that they used to call me the cat lady and actually put cat laces. So I spent a lot of time trying to create relationships with women at the firm, that understanding what their perspectives were. These senior women who have kind of grown up in the organization and had kids, had families, have really been there for decades. And it was really interesting. I had a conversation with a senior woman at one point who said to me, just be careful when you have kids because they're not going to change your goals. And I work in a business that's very focused on like how much you bring in assets and sales goals. And because they don't care, they're going to focus. If your number was X, it's going to be X, whether you're out for 3 to 6 months or not. And you're just going to have to like figure out how to do that. Which is crazy because then that means when you're out on maternity leave or even thinking about having a family, you're always thinking, well, how do I plan this in the right way? How do I plan this at the time that I'm not going to get hurt by being promoted? I had that conversation with many people at times where it's like, well, I can't have a kid before I become a VP because then I might get stuck. I need to wait until I get that next promotion, or I need to make sure that I'm working when I'm on maternity leave to make sure that I'm hitting these numbers. And I think there's just this culture that you almost give praise to people who don't like take time for themselves. I actually was talking to my neighbor last week who works in finance. She's very high up at a financial services company here in New York, and she had a baby 2 weeks ago. I ran into her 7 days later and on a Sunday and asked her, oh, how long is your maternity leave? How long are you going to be off? And she stated, I'm going back Wednesday. 10 days later. And I asked her, why would you do this? And she was like, it's kind of just like the expectation at my company. This is also a publicly traded finance company. They have the resources to like get someone to cover for you. And so I think there's this culture that is created not only in finance, but I think a lot of corporate cultures. It's almost that when women are out or women are thinking about having babies, it's actually a cost to the business. And if you actually look at the research, the cost to the business is the fact that they do not support women through these times. And then women end up leaving, which means then you have a cost to find someone new. Then you have a cost to train someone new. Then you have a cost to make sure that that person is even the right fit because you already had the right fit in the person before. And there's just a huge flip in what the real cost is versus what corporate America, in my mind, looks at what the cost of the business actually is. And it trickles down through the whole culture of companies.
Yeah, you know what, in the grand scheme of things, is 3 to 5 months of slightly lower productivity when you have a great employee who's going to be with you for years versus 3 to 5 months of trying to recruit somebody and having an empty position. It's such a good point, and it's not one I've really thought about it with that framework before. What's striking me about what you're talking about, and I recognize that this conversation is very specific to those women who are working in corporate America, and yet that's an important segment of the population. But as it relates to everyone, there's 4 different metrics by which you have to sort of think about family planning. So there's where are you with your life? How are you feeling emotionally about it? Do you have a partner? Then there's where are you with your career? And can you do this right now? There's biology. We talk about that a lot in the podcast, that no matter what age you are, you might find that you're facing fertility challenges. And then there's the financial component. Am I financially ready to support this life decision? And I know we were sort of thinking we might have the conversation at the last stage and to talk about your experiences a little bit, but it seems to me like when you're counseling people with their money and their planning efforts, you have to support them at all levels.
Oh, yes. I mean, as someone who talks to people with money, I joke sometimes they were actually like a psychologist to people. And it is. I have a lot of conversations with people about that because those things can all actually be very intertwined. I wouldn't say that they are separate items, even though we're naming them as separate things. They're very connected. And when you're thinking about your career, that is related to money. That is related to what your career trajectory is. And you actually see, because women take career breaks, their earnings potential is actually lower over time.
What time frame are you talking about there? Like, of course, your earning potential is going to be maybe lower in the year that you take off, but are you talking that there's a long-term impact to stepping out of the workforce for the 3 months it takes to have a baby?
Yeah, I'm talking about for forever. When women get hit twice, because then we tend to be the people who take care of our parents at the end of the day. So we take care of the kids and then we take care of the parents. But 3 months is not going to totally ruin everything. And hopefully you're still making the same salary and things. But especially for those who may say, you know what, I'm going to take a year off of work and then I'll come back into the workforce. You've taken a year off and now companies are going to discount that fact. And you're maybe at a lower salary, which means over time, as you start to earn more and more, you're earning off of a lower base. And it's really hard to ever catch up to that amount unless you have some really amazing advocate for you to focus on that. We look at actually the gender investment gap. And part of that is the fact that women's salaries peak earlier than men's. Part of that is because we take career breaks. We tend to have kids and take a possible short career break within there. And so our salaries actually peak in our 40s, which versus men's peak in their 50s. And so their salaries actually keep increasing for a decade longer than ours.
Whoa. Okay. So that has implications. Money is one of those subjects. And somebody was calling me actually earlier this morning and said, I just hate talking about money. And I think we all do. Like, it's so uncomfortable. It's not a subject we've covered all that much in the podcast. If you are earning less and you peak earlier and some sort of penalty in the way you're investing and the way you're earning, and we're talking about those people who are making salaries, how does that impact the way you support and show up for your family in the long run? Have you guys done any research around the earnings gap as it relates to how you feel on a day-to-day basis about your family life?
We did a whole financial wellness survey last year. And we actually asked women how money made them feel. And majority of women actually said it made them physically ill, that money created so much anxiety that it was actually getting them sick. So not only is this burden over your head or it's something that you're thinking about, you're actually physically ill. And so I cannot overestimate how important talking about money, thinking about money, and having that conversation is. I think a lot of us try to push it off, but it's really important to focus on that.
Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's imagine that somebody is sitting in front of you for the first time and you are helping them think about what their long-term goals are as they relate to just life in general, whether they want kids, whether they need to take care of aging parents or sick siblings or something like that. How do I even begin to wrap my head around the intersection of my financial life, my vision for how I want my life to go, and my planning?
So I think first you need to be very realistic on the cost of things. I have these conversations with people all the time.
Yeah.
And I find that people will budget college, egg freezing, and IVF. Those are like the things they don't budget for all those other things. You know, when we're putting together a financial plan, people say, you know, budget 20K for this and those types of things. People do not budget for all of the other costs. And so I think, unfortunately, our system is not the best in terms of figuring out how much things cost, but really taking an assessment of, number one, if you need a surrogate, if you need IVF, if you're going to be freezing your eggs, what are the costs to all of that? Do you work at a company that covers things like that? What are they going to cover versus not cover? What's your insurance going to cover versus not cover? You can call your insurance agency to really get some of that information. Then there's also the cost of having a kid. And this is something, even as someone who plans financially for a living, really came as a surprise to me. And thankfully, I'm privileged that I could afford this. But I've had this conversation with so many people. My hospital bill in New York City was over $8,000, like, to me. And literally, I'm fighting with the insurance company. I'm fighting with the hospital about this. They actually billed me for a whole extra day because I was admitted at 11:30 p.m. So if I just waited an extra 30 minutes, I could have saved $1,000. I wish someone told me that I could have waited, but at that time I did not think about that.
Last thing you're thinking about in that moment. And also, had a doctor said to you, wait a half an hour before you start pushing and it's cheaper, you'd be like, are you kidding me? So you said that budgeting for IVF and surrogacy and some of those things is something a lot of people plan for or they expect. But a lot of the guests on this podcast or those people that I talk to regularly do not expect that that's something that they're going to have to.
Yeah, because they don't know that they're going to need IVF or something. So a lot of people don't think about it until they need it is the problem. And that's when you start budgeting for it.
I've been dutifully saving, or maybe not doing as good a job saving as I probably should have. And I'm getting ready to have a kid. And I'm suddenly find that I have a fertility challenge that I was not expecting. And I need IVF. Do I wait on the IVF until I've got enough money in my pocket? Do you recommend moving forward so that I'm not losing months and years of my life, waiting to have enough money and then figure it out later? How do I balance those two really complicated challenges?
So I think there's always a balance between your personal goals and happiness and money. And if you talk to a financial planner or financial advisor, I think it's always important for someone in that position to understand that there's also an emotional component to this. And so it's not straight about what is the best thing monetarily, because that might not be the best thing for your life to focus on it. It might not be the best thing for you to freeze your eggs monetarily, but you know that that's important to you in your life. When you're looking at it, it's a tough position to be in, to kind of get to that and realize I'm going to have a cost to this that I did not expect. I think everything financially depends on your circumstances and your situation and what you can afford and such. But I think there are a lot more resources out there than there used to be to figuring this out. There's a lot more companies that cover costs like this, but like your savings is for things like this that come up in your life, that it's specifically there to know that if something comes up, you can spend that money. And of course, it depends on how much savings you have, what your spending is, that you are employed, all of that. But if something is important to you as planning for your family, that is life-changing to you. That is not something that just changes for a day. And I would argue that whole savings that maybe you did for the past 10 or 20 years was for this purpose, and not to feel guilty about going into your saving because the unexpected happened.
I'm smiling a little bit because of the word guilt. So we talked about the visceral feeling that talking about money makes you want to throw up, because it's connected to feelings of, can I have the things I want?
Yeah.
Can I have the life I want? Can I take care of the family in the way I want? Will I be okay if I get sick? Will my family be okay? But then there's this feeling of guilt too. If I spend on XYZ, am I ruining a future potential because I should have been saving for something else?
You still feel like, am I irresponsible? Am I frivolous? Am I not thinking? Am I doing something different than my peers? Because also people don't talk about it. How is everyone else affording this? I feel like I've never had any game of like, how does everyone else afford things in life? And you feel like you can't. And maybe it's like we all just can't and we all figure it out. The whole reason we work is to be able to support our lives, but to be able to do the things we want to do and to have money for the unexpected like this. I think it is take a step back, take a breath, go on a walk, and not always feel so guilty that you may be in a different position than your peers or your friends.
Such a relief to hear that. I know for me also, after having my child, it was funny because I had this expectation for how my finances would go. And then, of course, childcare costs are so much more expensive than I ever budgeted for. Even having spoken to my friends who had babies a couple of years before me, the childcare costs have changed so much in the past 2-3 years.
Yeah.
My budget was totally wrong. And then that gets tied into when I don't have the disposable cash that I expected to have to do things like go out to dinner or whatever. The sense of identity is changing. I was always that person who was like, once I have a kid, it won't change me. I'll continue to travel. I'll continue to go out. I'll continue to be me. Obviously, the pandemic wrecked that. But how do you advise people to imagine their lives post babies or after a family member gets sick?
It's a difficult thing to think about. And it is really opaque what life looks like after a kid. I personally, I am crazy. I have a spreadsheet about everything that has ever happened. Every vacation I go on has a budget and a spreadsheet and like the cost that I have on it all. And even when I thought about the cost of our nanny, I way under budgeted what that was because I Googled it and Google told me what a nanny in New York City gets paid. And apparently they were very off, like by a third, which is a significant amount of money. Thinking about your life in money after a kid is you need to do research. You need to talk to your friends. But as you said, things change very quickly. Like we live in a high inflationary environment. What someone may have charged a couple of years ago may be very different. And so I actually always tell people, you're creating that financial plan. Maybe you have the budget and then perhaps you take a percentage of that and actually increase it and see, well, if the cost really costs 15% more, would I be okay? If they are 20% more, like where do I kind of stand on here? And then there are always choices that you have to think about within there. Cost of a nanny versus going to daycare and living in New York City versus somewhere else. Like how you said, choose, would I rather spend, like save the money to go to dinner, or would I rather spend the money on a nanny, which I know you and I have spoken about was something for me that was actually non-negotiable when I thought about my career. Because I don't have the flexibility. I pre-pandemic used to travel a lot. I work a lot. I don't have that flexibility to be like, I can be there at 5:30 to pick them up. I need someone who I can say, sorry, I'm running late on calls. And I need someone who just like shows up in the morning and does everything. And frankly, like does the laundry, preps their food, does all those things. I don't have time to do that. And it's also deciding financially, but what time wise do you have? Because I think sometimes people always think about time and money separately, but I know people always say time is money. I don't think people really live like that. And there's the things like frustrate. Well, is it worth to pay the $5 in delivery fees? I hate paying delivery fees, by the way. And I was talking to a colleague one day and she was like, Emily, is it really worth that like hour you go there? Isn't $5 worth your hour? And I really thought about it. And in this day and age, I have no time. Yes, $5 is worth that hour. What I can get done with that. And I think you have to take yourself out of that view and really think about what you can be using your time best for, how you should be budgeting for the unexpected of things actually being more expensive than you once planned within there. And then the implications for your life, as you were stating, with someone who can't just frivolously go on trips anymore wherever we want because that costs a lot more money. And I think really being honest with yourself and those expectations is important, but it's hard. I'm not going to pretend to anyone that this is really easy. Again, I do this professionally for a living, and so many things came that I was totally blindsided by.
One of the things I was blindsided by, and I have two comments on what you just said, was the delivery fees. As a single parent, I have chosen to have things like groceries and diapers delivered regularly from Target and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and you name it. And the delta, that cost of a delivery fee is like the single parent tax I have to pay, because you can't send somebody to the store to go get diapers. And the alternative is I pay an extra hour of the nanny fees, which is more expensive, so that I can go grocery shopping. Or I bring the baby with me with the pandemic and getting him in and out of the car, or walking with the stroller and like shoving it all into the stroller. I mean, it's doable. And that wasn't something I budgeted for at all. It didn't occur to me that with one set of fewer hands, I would have to spend more money on getting things brought to the house. Yeah. But similarly, when I think about that as like a single parent tax that I pay, I'm thinking about covering childcare as a tax that women have to pay in order to show up and do our jobs well. You either have the less expensive childcare or the fewer hours covered, and therefore you have to step back a tiny bit in your career in order to do the pickups, do the drop-offs, or be more present for your munchkin, or you have to pay more in order to show up more at work. And the guys don't necessarily have to think like that.
I think that's totally right. And there's a certain guilt over that. And even I have felt that. As I mentioned, I have a nanny and she leaves at 6. And I was on a call a couple of weeks ago with some colleagues and it was running late. I finally said to them, I'm like, sorry, you guys, I got to go. And I just kept apologizing. And all of them, I work at a women's, they're all like, Emily, it's fine. Why are you apologizing? If you have to go, you have to go. We'll reschedule more time for next week. But I didn't even want to ask them. And that's not because of the company I worked for or the people I was on the phone with. They're the nicest people in the world. And some of them have kids. It was because culture tells me that I'm going to look weak. And frankly, I grew up in a financial culture that says I'm going to look weak if I tell them that I need to go because this should be the most important thing to me, not going to take care of the baby. And I agree. I think it's a really hard balance to have with all of that and thinking about what those costs are against your career, because it does. When you know that you may leave at 5 and go pick up the baby, but once you put them down, you're working again. And who cares? Who cares if that's how you work? But even though in the pandemic we live in remote work, somehow I still find that it's something that hangs over women's heads.
Yeah. And it's a perception thing too. And I'd be very curious. I want to state something that may be obvious to our listeners or may not be. You and I are probably at a similar age point in our lives. I might be a little bit older than you. We've both recently had babies. We both work in finance. And so we occupy a certain segment of the population, both socioeconomically, and there's the East Coast sensibilities. There's a lot of things that we share that may not be shared by everyone. And yet I do think there is this cultural norm or this self-perception around who am I if I'm not hustling? And I don't know if the next generation has that, but I think the question of like, I can't leave at 5 comes down to, I need to hustle. I need to work hard. I need to be the best professionally. Yep. And that's something I really struggle with.
I know I shared this with you previously, but one of the things that really comes to mind for me is when I first got pregnant, it was such a confusing time, frankly, because while I'm so happy on one side, I literally told my husband my career was over. I like cried because of it. I was being very dramatic, but I had seen so many things and I was like, my career is, I know it is over. Like I hustle, I work a million hours, and it almost becomes like, think in a certain way in society, in just the workplace now, that not only is it expected, it almost becomes people's like identity. And so I think I identified myself with someone who just like works all the time. And like, that's who I became. And I couldn't imagine myself not being like that. Although I had no idea what parenthood would look like, I was very aware that I couldn't keep the laissez-faire lifestyle that I lived with work, where, you know, my CEO may be like, Emily, we need to go to LA tomorrow. And I just like, go to LA tomorrow. Like, that doesn't work as well. But we used to do things like that. And it's not that she expects me to at all or blames me for it, but it's in my head that I'm not going to be able to be that person who does this. And I feel the guilt feeling again. It's almost like shame. I think there's lots of people who feel like that, but it was a really scary time for me when I first got pregnant to even think about what life looked like, trying to balance work and parenthood, which I know is a never ending conversation that we could talk about, but I felt totally afraid.
I totally empathize with that. And I recognize we jumped right into all the financial planning and the like how the world is shifting for women in the workplace conversation, but we haven't talked much about you. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you knew you were ready to start your family, how you and your husband had some of those discussions, and a little bit about your path from the person that you've just described, this workhorse, this intelligent, successful, driven New York finance woman, to the woman you are now, who's all of those things and also a mother.
One thing was interesting. Anyone who lives in New York will understand it's very easy to just continue on your life path and not think about change, and everyone is kind of hustling around you and working and to kind of continuing in the same direction. And I always knew that we would have kids, but to be honest, I always imagined I'd have kids like 5 years later, which would probably be like really, really hard. Like, I'm not in my 20s, but it was really a refocus on what mattered in the pandemic. The pandemic, although it was horrible and changed all of our lives immensely, also, I think, gave us all a step back to realize what is actually important. I think at some point I was running so fast that I didn't really think about my life and what I wanted next and when I was going to do it. I truly think if the pandemic didn't happen, I would have been one of those people who was 45 and like realized I wake up one day and was like, oh my God, I never had kids. Like, right. I think I would have been that person.
And by the way, a number of my female friends in finance have done that in their late 30s and said, oh my God, I forgot to date. I've been hustling so hard with my career. I forgot to really start building relationships with a partner. And now I'm in my late 30s. It sounds so silly, so cliche, but there is something about having your head down and focusing on the next project and the next big win or the next whatever, and realizing that your goals have sort of slipped by unnoticed.
Yeah, because you just don't talk about it. When you sit about your goals at the beginning of the year, do you think about your personal life with goals? No, it's like if you're thinking about your work, you're writing everything down.
I actually do. I have this. So if you're anal about your budget spreadsheet, I am anal about my goal setting. And I have a personal, professional, and I do it and I revisit it at least annually, but sometimes quarterly. And I'm one of those crazy people, but I don't think it's very common. And I would put things in my 3-year plan. I'm going to start talking to fertility doctors. And in my 5-year plan, I'm going to start having a baby. And I met all my goals and timelines around that. But I think I'm unusual with that one.
Yeah, probably. And even like no one's sitting down to have like an annual review with you being like, did you hit your personal goals? You have someone who checks in with you to see like, did you actually do what you said? It's quite difficult when you're thinking about that. And for me, it was really being able to take that step back and think about what mattered. But even though I kind of freaked out then once I was pregnant, that maybe this isn't going to ruin my life. Like, we're working remotely and it still works. If I work out at this time, or if I do things, it still works. I can still get my job done. And I still got my job done without traveling 24/7, type of thing either. And so that realization within there, and my husband always wanted kids. And so he would have had kids like 5 years before. So that was never an issue. And we did not have any trouble getting pregnant, which we were very, very blessed in that sense. And I'm very lucky. I think that there was a wake up call for me while I was running too fast to say, slow me down and say, hey, perhaps you need to think about what your life goals are. And so you don't wake up one day and realize that you didn't actually do the things that you wanted to do in your life. I'm so happy. Like, I can't even imagine
And was it just this gradual realization that, hey, this is doable in the context of the pandemic slowing you down? Or was there a wake up call moment or a conversation with your partner?
It's a good question. He had always brought it up to me more than I had brought it up to him. We really had a few conversations, I would say, that still made me a bit nervous, I think, about the overall plan, but enough to know that what was important for us in our lives was more important than some of these other things that we were talking about. All those things can be figured out. And frankly, even my CEO is a woman, and she's been very, very successful on Wall Street. And she had kids while she was going up the corporate ladder, and she was in the C-suite at big banks. And I think for me, even being able to have conversations with someone like that, who has done it, did it at such a high level that I don't feel like I have to give up things in my life, because I've seen someone who I speak to multiple times a day being able to achieve what I look as greatness without having to sacrifice doing that. Having two kids was an important part for me outside of even talking to my husband, to be honest. Having that experience of someone who had gone through that, like obviously my husband is important part of this, since he's my partner. She was just as important.
We talk a lot about having role models or having people who can go to bat for you in your professional lives, but it's really having that visual expansion of, wait a minute, this is possible. To some extent, you mentioned earlier, this feeling like you're in a rat race and always comparing and not knowing how anyone is doing it financially. How are people living like this? I think the same thing goes to parenting and to managing it all. Like, how are you running this career and being a parent at the same time? And it looks great and glossy from the outside. And frankly, it's a shit show underneath the surface.
Yeah. And when I first came back to work, I think most employers would be like, oh, I hope they don't have another baby soon. One of the first things she said to me was, she's like, I loved having kids back to back, Emily. I would highly recommend it. Not something I plan to do in my cards. One baby is enough for me right now. They're saying that's what I liked. I think that support is so important.
Yeah, but in my career, what happened is I had to lean really heavily on my colleagues to step forward in ways that they hadn't budgeted in their own lives. They're saying, okay, I'm working this many hours and I'm doing these certain projects. And my maternity leave, because I work in a very small firm, required other people to take on and go over and above. And one of the things I hear a lot from women who choose not to have babies, and frankly, men, is that it's unfair to them that they're constantly asked to step forward because they haven't made the same choices. I'm choosing to be single. I'm choosing to invest in travel or other life experiences that don't include kids. So why is the burden on me to be this person that's always leaned on whenever needed just because I don't have kids? And so that, it goes that way too.
I agree with that. I was very, very lucky. The people who covered me, and there's a woman on my team who stepped up in every way possible. She has a son who's actually just went to college this year, and she literally would remind Emily, I got this. You go do your life. She was like, I'm happy to do this for someone, for you to get that time in your life. You're right. There is something sometimes in society that people almost feel like you're putting your burden on them. And I don't know if I have a solve for that, frankly. It's a cultural shift that needs to happen.
The only way we can solve that is by doing it for somebody else, paying it forward. Yeah. And a number of years ago, I had a colleague whose husband got sick for a period of time. And so we stepped in and supported her. And to some extent, whether or not you choose to have kids, there may be a crisis that emerges. That's your opportunity to say, okay, somebody did it for me. I'm going to do it for you.
The same woman had breast cancer, and she was like, someone covered for me the year I was out. And I know there are people who will do things and pay it forward. And so I think there are great people out there. It's just, the society that we have is not built in a way to support women right now, unfortunately.
It's been a big conversation with a lot of major topics. We talked about a lot of things. I have one question that I'm worried is going to take us down the rabbit hole, but I think it's important. And that is, you've mentioned several times that you had a little freak out when you got pregnant. Are you willing to share with us what that freak out was all about?
Yeah, kind of alluded to this. I'm a huge planner in life, and you can't plan the day you get pregnant. You can't plan, when you're going to have the baby and all those types of things.
I knew the exact date I got pregnant, but that's different.
But it was really difficult, I think, for me, number one, to lose control in some sense, and to recognize that I was losing control a bit over what my future looked like, because I didn't know what it was going to look like for me in my work-life balance. I didn't know totally what it would look like financially. Like, again, my guess is there was a lot of things that came up, like my hospital bill, that I did not expect to receive in the mail. And really losing that control, not knowing what was going to happen in my career. I felt like I was really on that step of like, this is what I'm going to be doing next year in my career and next. And is this going to derail what I always imagined who I am? Because I had aligned myself so much with work as my identity. And I think my husband would look back now and he was very, very supportive about it. But I think he's like, oh my God, like what just happened? And how do I deal with this woman who is pregnant and very emotional about it, but also terrified of losing who I was? I think was like the biggest thing within there in so many different ways, but really compiled together to freak out.
And so now we can roll forward. Who are you now? Are you the same person? Are you different in the way you expected to be different? What does it look like for you at the moment?
So the one thing I would say is I was so terrified to take a maternity leave. It is not that big of a deal. It is a very quick period of time. I kind of like forget that it even happened now, to be honest. Like, oh yeah, I was out. You know, it wasn't that long ago. It was only 70 months ago. And it feels like forever ago. I actually feel like my maternity leave and having a baby was helpful for me in my career overall. Feel different at work. I feel like in the way that I am able to show up for people and the way that I react to people and the way that I understand what is important and not important, I feel like I always felt everything was at the utmost importance before. And I think having a baby really changed my view that not everything matters that much. Like, yes, maybe to the company and there are things, but not everything needs to be done today. Not everything is so urgent. I saw a Instagram post recently of someone's out of office that says, and if this is urgent, take a breath, because very few little things in life are urgent. It's like, that's correct. I think it allowed me to change who I am for the better and find connections in deeper ways. I'm part of moms groups now of people who I love, people I have never have met in my life. And I frankly can't even imagine life before, not only because of how much I love our baby, I think it changed who I am to be a better person, a better colleague, a better boss, and to deal with the situations at work that come up in a more level-headed way, frankly.
I mean, that level of change is worth freaking out about when you don't know. Like, I don't know what's at the end of this tunnel. I think it's going to be different. And you're saying, yeah, it was different. It's good. It's better. It's not better for everyone, but it is better. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you.
I mean, I'm really tired, I would say. Like, that is not better. I'm really, really tired. There is some negative to that, but I could go for a lot more sleep, but hopefully that'll come someday.
So there's one question I ask all of my guests, and I'm really curious to hear your perspective because I really like the candor with which you're bringing to this conversation. And that is, based on your current lived experiences, how do you define family? What does it mean for you?
I hope how people think about it these days, but perhaps differently than maybe people traditionally do. Like, I think our nanny is part of our family. She loves us. She loves our son. No, she's not part of blood relative within there. And I think that really the definition of how to look at family at this point is thinking about the people around you who you love, who support you, who bring joy to your life, and allow you to be who you are to the best of your ability. And that does not necessarily mean someone who is blood related to you. People always say it takes a village to raise a kid. It does. And that doesn't only need to be your parents. And so we depend on other people in our circles, like our good friends who live here. And so I really think it is the community that you build, and it doesn't necessarily need to be how family has traditionally been defined.
I really like that description that you just shared with us. People who enable you to be your best self. That's great. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. If somebody wanted to learn more about how they start thinking about planning for either an emergency or a family future that they're hoping for, where do they find you? Where do they find Ellevest? What's the best way to start that process?
So you can find Ellevest online. We're Ellevest, ELLEVEST.com. You'll find me on the site there, but you can also email to our group that comes directly to me, which is just pwm@ellevest.com. And my name again is Emily Green, and always happy to answer any questions, put people in the right direction. And we have lots of resources and women who are really focused on these areas that are more than willing to have these types of conversations and help think through how to plan financially.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily. We look forward to connecting with you in the future. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.
I am thrilled to share and extend a free level 2 subscription to the California Cryobank Donor Catalog by using the promo code STORK'd, that's STORKD, at cryobank.com. You will receive free access for 90 days, which is an $145 value.